Good afternoon, everybody. We are doing our first show in the Netherlands today, which is all very exciting because I live in Normandy, and with the Normandy battles ended in August, and so we're now venturing out of Normandy. So it's all very exciting. So it's a familiar team again with us today in terms of our experts. Joining me is, with the headphones on, is Frank Gubbels, and he's on the ground in Netherlands. Well, he's not at the sites; he's in the country. And then beaming in from Georgia is Kevin Hymel, who both of these guys did the Mortan shows, if you remember those, back in August. But this is still the same division, American 30th Division, and this time we're in the border between Belgium and the Netherlands. And we're not going to call it Holland all afternoon. That's the rookie mistake. It's the Netherlands. Holland is a part of the Netherlands. People from Holland are Dutch, people from Holland are in the Netherlands, but not all people in the Netherlands are in Holland. Is that right, Frank?
Spot on, Paul.
So there we are. So this is a complicated battle in some ways to talk about, and I'm going to be handing over to Frank for a lot of it, but I'm going to start with Kevin because we all know that in September there was a massive, great, very famous battle, Operation Market Garden, into the bridges and Hell's Highway and Arnhem. But this is before that. This is 6 days earlier. Just roughly, what was happening in that period, early September, with regards to the Allied army now pushing towards Germany?
So the Allies have broken out of the Normandy bridgehead. They've raced across France. They've encircled a large portion of the German army. Whoop! Did I lose you, Paul? There we go.
No. Let's put the map up.
Yep. The Falaise pocket has been closed. Paris has been liberated, and the Allies are pushing towards racing towards the German border. Patton it really is facing no opposition, and it's really kind of going hell-bent for leather. First Army's kind of getting reestablished after Paris because it was kind of pinched out of the line. And the British and the Canadians are just sweeping forward. So from this sort of static, almost World War I-like battlefield, you've got a war of maneuver that kind of catches everyone's breath, I guess you could say. And now suddenly Eisenhower, who has been so frustrated through the month of July, sees nothing but opportunities by the end of August. But there's sort of a question of, where do we put our strength? Where do we make the push? And if I could just make one historical correction, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this small indie film called A Bridge Too Far. You guys have heard of this?
Yeah, vaguely heard of that one.
Yes.
Yeah, little
Okay.
kind of secondary movie. Yeah.
So in the very beginning of it, they sort of have a little documentary, and they talk about Eisenhower's choices, and they put him between Montgomery, pushing into the Netherlands, or Patton sweeping in towards Metz and Nancy. That's really a misinformation there, because Montgomery at this point of the war is an Army group commander, and the only other Army group commander is Omar Bradley. George S. Patton is an Army commander, so he's one level below Montgomery. And so the debate is really between Bradley and Montgomery, but Patton is kind of the sexy name that people associate with World War II. And so they kind of upgrade him at the very beginning of A Bridge Too Far, where they should have stressed that the argument was between Bradley and Montgomery. And so, for Montgomery, in front of him are low flatlands. You've also got a lot of V1 and V2 rocket hammering. And he's also shortest route to the industrial section of Germany, the Ruhr. And if you can take out Germany's industry, you've taken away their war-making ability. Patton doesn't have such lofty targets in his direction, but what he has to offer is a closer route to the Rhine River. And once you reach the Rhine, you can sort of set up a bit of a defensive line to prevent the Germans from counterattacking, which is what we'll see happening in the Bulge.
Yeah.
And even a lot of the Germans after the war said, boy, we had nothing to stop Patton, And if you had continued enforcing his attack, there was no way we could have stopped him getting to the Rhine River. Now, of course, we should drop in here the fuel situation and the supply situation, because the armies now are advancing so far from their base in Normandy and Cherbourg, where the supplies are coming in, that it, we can't supply everything to the front. And so Eisenhower will make that decision even before Market Garden. He decides to give the weight of supplies to Montgomery, but not just to Montgomery's army group. They're going to add in extra supplies to First Army, because First Army will be protecting Montgomery's flank as he pushes forward. Yeah. And so it really is Patton feeling kind of left out of the excitement. And Montgomery, he basically tells Eisenhower, you need to stop Patton cold while I do this. And Eisenhower says, well, I just can't do that. I can't leave George hanging. So he does give supplies to Patton. And what's not as well known is Patton was very good at conserving what he had. Yeah. He puts serious demands on all vehicles behind the line. They can only travel at like 35 miles an hour to conserve fuel. He puts his infantry, ahead of the tanks for a while in front of his armored divisions. And he's basically using what he did in World War I, drain half your tanks to give gas to the other half and keep moving. So Patton doesn't freeze. He keeps moving and keeps the enemy just enough off balance that, they don't know what he's going to do in his sector. So
before I just need to jump in. And before we bring Frank in, you mentioned the word freeze. And I think another thing that's worth mentioning at this point is the Allies are aware that the meteorology reports are suggesting that the winter of 44-45 is going to be a pretty bad one. And it was. It ended up being the worst one of the 20th century. So everybody, all the players involved, Patton, Montgomery, Bradley, even the leaders like Churchill and Roosevelt, are conscious of trying to get some of this war cracked before the winter comes and it all bogs down. So there's I thought about titling this show the Rhine Rat Race, because that's why the words that get used to describe it. I decided it wasn't very familiar with most people watching it, but there is this sense of race going on to try and get some stuff done, get some ground covered, get into Germany before the winter descends. But we'll come back to you for more overview stuff later on, Kevin. I want to bring in Frank. Frank, welcome to the show. Hello.
Thank you.
Your dad is Phil. We've got two cameramen on site today. We've got Jürgen and we've got George, who is Frank's dad. So as George has been holding this view for a while, tell us where we are, Frank. Tell us where we're starting, and tell us your interest in this particular campaign.
Well, Paul, I just want to ask you to put up a map which is called 30th Route number 19. Yeah. And it's okay. It's not the best map there is, because there's a mistake on it, but I will point it out to you, because you can see the green line going on the map, and that is not completely true, because that should be a little bit further north. Right. But if you take a look, you can see the green line, and then you can see a small on the right hand side between 109 and 110. You see Opey. Yep. And just to the right of it, that's where the Albert Canal and the Meuse River is. That's at number 110. Right. And if you go back to my dad's screen, yep, in the far distance, you can see that arch. That's a bridge crossing the Albert Canal. And in the early morning of September 11, 1944, so exactly 76 years ago today, exactly. That's when the 117th and 119th Regiment of the 30th Infantry Division started crossing the Albert Canal and moved up to the Meuse River. My dad can zoom out this if you want, because I will give us a better view as well, because you can see the street. This is the exact road those guys took after they crossed the Albert Canal. And if my dad turns around his camera right now slowly, because that's when you can get the view. He's standing right at the Meuse River.
Fantastic stuff. And just pointing out, people, this is both.
Yes, okay, my dad can stop.
This. So this is their first time doing this. So bear with them. And they're in Belgium, between the border of Belgium and Netherlands, and the internet connection can be a bit iffy there. So this is live imaging coming 76 years on to the day these events happen. That's what we're trying to do here on World War II TV.
If my dad can go a little bit to the left, just a tiny bit to the left. Okay, that's it. Okay, the view is not perfect. It's not clear, but Paul, I sent you a picture of the man crossing the Meuse River at Hermal-sous-Argenteau, because that's what this place is called. And my dad is standing at the exact spot where the 117th and 119th regiments crossed. No, not that one. We're going to use that one later on.
I thought so. Which number is it?
It must be number 1 and number 2.
Okay.
And
I haven't got a number. Oh yeah, there we go. No, that's not original one. Sorry, bear with me. Is it Argenteau?
Okay. Then, well, you can take the pictures of Argenteau because they are correct.
Oh, hang on,
and just not James Smith. That's a story a little later on, but that's the one.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can see on the right-hand side of that picture, you can see a bridge being blown up by the Germans. So that's why the Americans had to cross the Meuse River by boats. And there were people who were helping them were Belgian resistance fighters. And yes, 2 regiments, 117th and 119th regiments, of course, that took quite a while to get all those men across the river. And the buildings at the other side of the river, there's still the exact same buildings as you can see in picture number 2.
Okay, I'll get picture number 2 up. Yep, keep talking. Yeah,
okay. And the 113th Squadron of the 113th Cavalry Group, they were in support of the 117th and 119th Regiments. But as you saw, the bridge had been blown up. So they had to drive further south into the city of Liège, which is about 10 kilometers further south. And then they had to come back up. Well, you can see the blown up bridge. And this is picture number 8, Paul.
Yeah, so I can't find number 2.
Oh, okay.
They change order on me inside the program. No, that's not the right
one. Okay, no problem. But we will see. My dad is turning to the right a little bit, and that's in the direction of Liège, which is about 10 kilometers further south. There was one bridge in Liège which had not been blown up by the Germans. So the 113th Squadron drove down 10 kilometers, had to cross the bridge, and drove back up for 10 kilometers. And if you take my dad's picture right now, because he's going to turn back to the left, and that took almost the entire day for the 113th to join the 117th and 119th regiments on the other side of the Meuse River. So you're basically looking west to east right now.
Yeah.
And well, about 10 to 15 kilometers further north, that's where the Dutch city of Maastricht is. And I think Kevin is familiar with the Dutch city of Maastricht. And
yes.
Of course, the Americans had to move up further north. Later on, they put up 2 pontoon bridges right here. And that's the picture you just showed us, Paul. Because in far distance of that picture, you could see one of the pontoon bridges. Kevin, I think you might know why they always put up 2 pontoon bridges a few hundred yards apart from each other.
Which number am I looking for, Frank? Sorry.
The same picture you just showed us was the bridge, Argenteau.
Well, I'm assuming it's for traffic, one traffic going east and other traffic going west, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So they didn't get any traffic jams. Sorry, Paul, you need one picture before that.
Yeah, because moving around. Each time I use them, they move around. That one, no, not that one. Keep talking. I'll find it.
Because this, okay. Well, that took almost the entire day just to establish a bridgehead on the eastern side of the river. So it was only in the morning of September the 12th that they started moving up north. And that's when they started to really move towards the Netherlands. Oh, that's one of the pictures. And actually, that's just that blown up bridge, which you saw with the boat inside the picture. That blown bridge was just to the right of this pontoon bridge. So you can see the Americans crossing towards the east and the other pontoon bridge was further to the north, a few hundred yards, and that was to get the empty trucks back, to evacuate the wounded further to the west. And
sorry.
I'm gonna take a look what kind of picture you wanted to show us, Paul.
Yeah, they keep every time I go back in. I've had this on the show. Every time I go back into the folder, they've changed their order. It's very hard to find them. But yeah, what we're doing is fantastic with the live images. So I wanted to make the point that when you're getting two regiments crossing a river like that you're without all the supplies, infrastructure behind, a river like that is a massive, great barrier, and you're in all sorts of potential for being isolated and cut off. And it's a huge body of water there. And yeah, I'm very grateful for you explaining in detail what's going on.
Well, there's one more thing I want to say about September 11, 1944, because in the Mortain shows, of course, we were discussing also about the 120th Regiment. Why didn't the 120th Regiment cross the Meuse River together with the 117th and 119th? And you will be familiar with this name, but the 120th Regiment captured the Belgian fortress of Eben-Emael at that particular day. And well, the Germans took it in 15 minutes in 1940, and they were very proud of it, while the Americans captured it in maybe even shorter time period, or maybe the same, but not a single bullet had been fired when the Americans captured it. And that happened today, 76 years ago as well. And my dad, sure, Kevin.
Frank, I was going to say, and the Americans used a lot less gliders than the Germans did when they captured it, right?
Yeah, they did.
Almost zero, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, I believe the number was 0.
They didn't have the time to build any gliders, because by the time they had built the gliders, they had already captured the fortress. So,
yeah.
So my dad can go back into the car, and he will drive up to the next spot, and that's only 2 minutes, Paul. So we're going to follow my dad. And well, as he has been going back to the car right now, well, the pontoon bridges, they were used quite often, of course. And alongside the river, the Americans had put up anti-aircraft, although not too much had happened up there. But if it is possible for you to put up the South Limburg map, and I just want to show you, because I used this one, because I used the previous map, as Hermal Sou Argento is not on this one, but in the very south, just where the screen ends at the bottom, that's where the village of Vizé is, and just 2 kilometers south is where they cross the Meuse River. So it's just not on this map, but they are moving up north, and you can see the Meuse River going up to the big red dot, which is Maastricht on the left-hand side of the screen.
Yeah.
But further south, so keep on going down. Yep, keep going down a little bit. You can see a Belgian place called Moulingen and a Dutch place called Meuse. But just to the southwest of Moulingen, so to the lower left of Moulingen, that's where my dad is going to make this second stop.
Okay.
That is going to be a picture I want to discuss with you. But before he gets there, well, you can see the map right now, and you can see on the left-hand side of Maastricht, it says 120th Regiment.
Yeah.
Then you've got to the right of Maastricht, to the east, it says 117th Regiment, and then you can see the red line going north to south, and then you can see the 119th.
Yeah.
But in between, you see all those red lines. On the left, that's 113th Squadron of the 113th Cavalry, and on the right-hand side, it's 125th Cavalry Squadron of the 113th Cavalry. They're also known as the Red Horse, and they were protecting the flanks of the 30th Infantry Division. You can see to the south of Maastricht also the fortress Eben-Emael, and that's where the 120th was. Well, after they captured the Belgian fortress of Eben-Emael, the 1st and 3rd Battalion of the 120th moved a little bit south as well and crossed the Albert Canal and Meuse River as well, just south of IJsden in the Netherlands. Yeah. But it was the 2nd Battalion, the same guys that were surrounded on top of Hill 314 in Mortain, that took the western side of Maastricht together with 2nd Battalion 117th, but we're getting to that when we're at the spot. But this just gives you the view of how it looks like, because okay, it's just a small area up here. As you would call it, it's a panhandle of the Netherlands, or as
but a lot of towns, a lot of villages, quite in places quite urban. Those rivers and canals are huge obstacles to cross. So there's a lot going on in quite a compact area, isn't it?
Well, a lot going on. Yes, there has been some fighting here, but remember, the Germans were still retreating.
Yeah.
As we were talking about a few days before Operation Market Garden started. And well, most Germans which were in this area, those guys didn't really want to fight anymore. They were elderly. Sometimes there were a couple of young soldiers, but mostly those were guys from the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. They didn't have enough planes anymore, and those guys were just sent up to the front line without any experience. And they didn't want to fight anymore. They just wanted to get back home and make sure that they got out of the war alive. They were done with it after 5 years. And well, at some points, those small rivers, they became real obstacles. But if you take it in mind that 2 regiments crossed the Meuse River up there, and in between the Albert Canal and the Meuse River, there was 1 American casualty who was killed in action. That's, well, with all due respect, but that's not too bad for a crossing with 2 regiments of a couple of 100 guys. So that shows that the Germans were pulling back already a lot, or still pulling back a lot.
I think it also shows, I'll bring Kevin, it also shows the Americans are learning. The 30th Division had a pretty bad time in Normandy, but they're getting much better and much more efficient. Would you agree, Kevin? Yeah, they're using their experience, they're using artillery, they're using support. They're not making rash advances now. So that they've learned a lot in that time. Although some of them are going to be very weary, aren't they? So the ones who've been in the line for 3 months, they're going to be on their last legs at this point, aren't they?
Correct. And pardon my American bias, but the American troops definitely learn fast. And, the Americans have learned through bad experiences in North Africa and to some degree Sicily that they need to rely on what's called combined arms. Early in the war, they're focusing on their infantry, using infantry tactics, and they're using armored divisions as if they're cavalry units, and every tank represents a horse. And what the Americans realized through debacles like Kasserine Pass is you can't rely on a single branch. You've got to coordinate them together using artillery, tanks, and infantry together, and engineers to make more methodical advances that can be quickly reinforced. You don't want these kind of hollow fists going out that can be easily crushed. So it's combined arms that the Americans have now adapted, and they're kind of using to finesse in Normandy and in the stretch across Europe here. And so, for all the lessons learned, not only in North Africa and Sicily, but also Normandy, because you got a lot of green divisions, that's really coming to fruition here. Now let's go back to Frank.
Yeah, we already put up the image my dad has right now. Paul, I did send you the pictures of James Smith. And James Smith was from K Company, 3rd Battalion, 117th Regiment. I don't know if you're able to find the pictures.
Yeah, got them.
And I just shortly want to discuss this picture because my dad is standing at the exact spot where this picture was taken.
That is very cool stuff, Frank.
Because you can see
that's that fence. This is
that's
what
the exact same fence.
WW2TV. There's the fence, and there I'll stop it again, and we'll go back to the live image there. The same fence, 76 years on. Fantastic job, Frank. This is what I love. I'm excited about this. I hope people watching are as excited as I am.
Paul, I'm going to tell you, just at the end of the fence, you can see a driveway going in, and then a hedgerow starts.
Yeah.
And where the driveway is, that's the exact spot where the American trooper was, James Smith. Because that fence was continuing, they made that driveway later on. So what I want to discuss with you, this is just a then and now picture, so my dad can go back into the car if he's finished up here. Because if you take your finger away, we have the complete shot that. but that's what they were aiming for, that building.
Right.
And my dad can go back into the car, but we just saw that same fence. If you go back to the picture.
Yeah. And what is that building?
It's just a random house. But what I want to discuss with you is the text underneath this picture, and we're going to discuss this just shortly, but it always says that James Smith of K Company 117 is aiming for a German sniper. Well, if you take a look at this picture, do you really think he's aiming for a German sniper?
I think he's aiming for a Tiger tank.
Well, Kevin, what I want to say is he has 3 Belgian resistance guys with him, maybe from the Brigade Piron. But if he was aiming for a German sniper, as if I was with the resistance, I was leaning against the wall. I was taking cover, and especially the guy who took the picture.
Yeah. Yeah. What's he doing? Yeah.
He's out in the open. So that's why I think this picture might have been put into a scene, but we're 100% sure that it is James Smith, and I love this picture. But I just think the text underneath the picture is wrong with.
Yeah, so you think he's possibly staged a bit later? You've got the other photo of James Smith as well. Show that one. You've got a photo of his wedding, isn't it? I think so. I'll get that one.
If I can
that's correct.
Yeah, there we are. There's James Smith.
That's James Smith, and that's his wedding picture. So that's the same guy who was sitting against, or leaning against the wall and aiming for the German sniper. And I think this is also an awesome picture because it brings a face to that story, because you don't see his face on that picture. And you can bring up Jürgen if you want, because we're gonna. So my dad is going, and that's my mom, of course. And there's Jürgen coming, and we're gonna get to Jürgen.
Yeah.
And Jürgen can hear us. Yeah, he needs to put it into landscape if he has to join us.
Yeah, we're impressed with what you're doing. It's all good stuff. Just keep going.
Okay, if you could put up the photograph. Sorry, Kevin.
Could we go back to that photograph real quick? There's something else that I just noticed. You were saying how the Dutch are a little further behind, whereas if there was a real sniper, they'd be pressed up against that wall. The photographer is incredibly exposed where he's taking that photo also. So I think that stresses that kind of relates back to what Paul said, that photo was probably taken a little bit later after the house had been cleared out, which was a common practice in World War II. Cameras
we had that with some of the army on farm photos in Normandy,
Yeah. And so cameras back then had what were called range finders. So you would look through first a range finder on your camera and you'd see 2 images and you would adjust it using knobs until you got to 1, and then you took the photograph. So photography back then was a lot different. Let's go back to the live shot here.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Paul, if you take up the movement 30th into the Netherlands map, that's where I will show you where Jürgen is right now. And Jürgen is standing actually at the border between Belgium and the Netherlands. And
hang on, you're getting it. Keep talking.
I will keep talking. Okay, because there it comes. Okay. Well, you can see all those colored lines, but you can see the red line. And the red line, that means 1st Battalion, 117th Regiment. And from the bottom of the line, and that's exactly where you had your mouse. That's where Jürgen is right now, because you can see a small battle happened up there.
Yeah.
And they were moving up north. But if you go back to Jürgen's camera, Jürgen is facing towards the Belgian town of Moulingen. And down this road, in the far distance of this road, there's a crossroad, which is called the Delahoe Crossroad. And the Americans were advancing from that crossroad up. And in the early morning, what happened, if Jürgen slowly turns his camera to the left, to the other direction, from the other direction, and that goes perfectly, from the other direction, all of a sudden, and not this car, but a German staff car was coming in. And who was inside that German staff car? That was Generalleutnant Hans Schmidt, or Lieutenant General Hans Schmidt. And he was the commander of the 275th Infantry Division of the Germans, and they had to delay the Germans in this area. What was he doing? He was actually going along the front line to inspect this front line. And they knew that Americans had crossed the Meuse River, but they thought it's just a small force. So they thought it's something like recon or patrol or something like that. And when they came down the road up here, and if Jürgen turns to the left again, so towards the crossroads, a little bit further, Jürgen, if possible, please. And that's perfect, Jürgen. Just down there, that's where Hans Schmidt bumped into the first Americans advancing up there, 1st Battalion of the 117th Regiment, A Company. And of course, the Americans opened fire on him. And there were 3 Germans in that car. That was General Lieutenant Hans Schmidt, his assistant, and the driver. Well, the driver was killed. The assistant was shot in his leg and was taken prisoner by the Americans. And the lieutenant was shot in his hip, but managed to escape. And what they say is that he escaped on both hands and feet, running towards Meuse. And you can see the dirt road. Yeah. That dirt road is leading towards Meuse. So in this area right here, that's where that happened with that German staff car. And his aide, the general's aide, he had taken a briefcase with him, full with documents. And of course, the Americans, well, they found a briefcase. They went through the documents, and they were quite interested in it, of course. So they handed it over to Elwood G. Daddo, who was a first lieutenant in the B Company of the 117th. And he was going through those documents, and he saw all the positions of the Germans in the southern part of Limburg province, but also the tactical withdrawal of the Germans towards the Siegfried Line. So the Americans had all the information they needed. When the general returned to Meuse, he was able to assemble a German forces of about 150 soldiers. And they made an attack towards the Americans because they still thought that it was just a small force. And that's when the Germans learned that the Americans were with many more men than they expected. And of course, they never got their briefcase back. So when you put it up like we were going to do a battle over briefcase, well, this is the spot where that happened. And afterwards, those documents were even ranked higher than the ones Dick Winters found at Brecourt on D-Day. Okay, when that happened, when the Germans made that attack to get that briefcase back, on the other side of the road, the left-hand side of that dirt road, you can see a small field and those buildings in the distance. Right in that small field, that's where Leonard Hoffman of A Company, 117th Regiment, was killed in action. About 20, 30 meters into that field, that's where Leonard Hoffman was killed in action. And that's a picture of Leonard. He was with Able Company, 117th Regiment. And just before crossing into the Netherlands, unfortunately, he was killed in action. And last year, we were also able to visit his grave with a couple of veterans from the 30th Infantry Division. Jürgen has a perfect shot right now, because about 30 meters into that field, it's a little bit yellow in the middle. That's where Leonard Hoffman, in that area, we cannot say that's the exact same spot, but in that area, that's where he was killed in action, unfortunately. So that's still Belgium. And that's Leonard's grave at the American Cemetery at Henry-Chapelle. Most of the men who were killed in action in this area are buried at the American Cemetery in Henry-Chapelle, or their body have been repatriated back to the United States, but that's his grave. And you can see September 12, 1944, around 10 a.m., that's the time that he was killed in action on that day. So that's tomorrow, 76 years ago. And if you're slowly,
how much I'm enjoying this, Frank, and I hope our viewers are understanding how unique this is to get these live pictures that no one knows this. Well, you know this stuff. I don't know these stories. This is absolutely amazing stuff. Thank you so much, Frank, for the work you
no problem
done preparing this. Because
the thing we see in
viewers aren't enjoying it, I'm enjoying it. I'm sure Kevin's enjoying it as well. Kevin's scribbling things down for his next tour into Netherlands.
well, what you see right now, that's the border marker between Belgium and the Netherlands. So you can see Orchard on the right, that's the Netherlands. But the dirt road, the field, and the main road, and everything to the left of the main road, that's still Belgium.
I just got a question on YouTube. How was Hoffman killed?
Well, in a firefight. So he was killed by rifle fire.
Okay, thanks.
Jurgen is going to walk on the dirt road now towards the Dutch village of Meuse. And while Jurgen is walking on that dirt road, I'm just going to go back to exactly 1 year ago tomorrow, because we had 4 veterans of the 30th Infantry Division visiting for the 75th anniversary, and they were driving down that same dirt road at 10 a.m. September the 12th, 2019, and they were up front. So Old Hickory drove back into the Netherlands first, 75 years after they had crossed the border up there. And I'm just going to say, Jurgen, your hand is in front of the lens of the camera. Well, this is the road that Captain John Kent used with Able Company. John Kent was the commander of Able Company 1st Battalion 117, and under his command, the troops moved up towards the village of Meuse. And you can see John Kent on the left-hand side of the picture with a small mustache. And that picture has been taken afterwards. That has been taken around November, maybe early December already, but I think it's late November 1944 in the Dutch city of Kerkrade, where the 30th was on rest for a few days. And just for your information, the guy with the bandolier on, that was Florian Lonizak. Jurgen is still walking on that same road. It hasn't changed much in 76 years. John Kent is on the right-hand side of this picture with Brigadier General Harrison. That picture was taken in 1945 when they were in Germany already. John Kent survived World War II. I just don't know when he passed away, but I believe it was in the last 10, 15 years or so. And Paul, when you contacted us, you were always talking about the first battle in the Netherlands. And yeah. Jurgen is going to get to that point. Take your time, Jurgen, because the Americans had to cross an open field. And we're going to see that field within a minute and a half or so. And well, I said, maybe I'm a little bit wrong with what I said. I said not too much has happened here. But they crossed the Dutch-Belgian border at 10 a.m. And Jurgen is walking the same distance right now, which will take you about 5 minutes or so. But it took the Americans 4 hours to get into Meuse. And most likely that's because of the Germans making that attack to get that briefcase back. And later, further up, that's when the Germans put up a machine gun. And that really took some time for the Americans to get rid of that German with the machine gun. Well, if you have to cross an open field, I don't have to explain much to you how difficult it is. And it's also on the high ground. So we're going to get a view from Jurgen, which gives you an overview as well. And
I mean, I just to cut in here, you know, those
sure.
who've been watching us all through the summer, you know, we've done a lot of shows where we've been talking about hours to get across open ground. Sometimes there is a strong enemy there. Sometimes there isn't a strong enemy there. But open ground is always a difficult space to move across. You've got to be either cautious or go for hell for leather. And I'm absolutely thoroughly enjoying what we're doing here, Frank. And you definitely owe Jurgen and George beers at the end of the day. So this is fantastic stuff. Are you enjoying it, Kevin?
I am, but I don't think the cameramen are doing a good job. I think you're going to have to fire them, Frank.
No, never.
I
know you're joking, Kevin. I know. You're really bad. You're really bad.
They are doing fantastic. This is amazing.
But Paul, if I get back to one show or so, can you please fire Kevin?
Yeah, I know. I tried, the problem is you try to get the people on board. You try name one, name two, name three. But Kevin's always at the bottom of the list. But all the others have said no, and McManus and Kershaw and everyone else has said no.
Okay.
Bloody
okay, but we're at the good spot. Because at the end of the field on your left-hand side, you can see a couple of dark trees. Yep. That's where the German was. And in the far distance, Jurgen is going to zoom in. You can see some sort of V shape in between the hills. It's a little bit to the right, Jurgen.
Yeah,
there it is.
Little V Valley there, yeah.
Yes, that's where the fortress of Eben-Emael is, the Belgian fortress. That's right in that hill. So that gives you a little bit of where we are looking towards. You don't see the fortress from this point, but that's where the fortress is. And if Jürgen zooms out again and then turns, so a little bit back, Jürgen, yep, and then to the left. Perfect. Because if you zoom in on the far distance, Jürgen, on the horizon, that's where my dad was filming at Ramal su Argento. So you get a little bit of a view, and I don't have a specific vintage. Well, you can see that chimney on the left-hand side, top left.
Yeah.
That's the area where my dad was filming just a few minutes ago. So you can see that is towards south. Jürgen is further north, and Eben-Emael is to the west from Meuse. So if Jürgen zooms out again and starts walking towards Meuse again, because at the end of the field, that's where the German was with that machine gun. And eventually the Americans made an attack from 3 different directions to get rid of it. But that took them a few hours. And
God, the ground is so flat.
Well, no, actually Jürgen is standing on the high ground, because you could see the hill where the fortress was in between. That's the valley where the Meuse River is going through.
Right. Okay.
Now you can see that's a village of Meuse. That's a church tower of Meuse. And you can zoom out again, Jürgen. You can walk into Meuse, Jürgen, if you want, please, because I have to take a look at the time. We really need to get moving. But on the left-hand side, that's where the German was with that machine gun. And people from Meuse, the civilians, they said, well, there was quite some shooting going on for a few hours, but all of a sudden, it was completely quiet. And that's when one of the guys went out of his building, his home, and that's a very dangerous thing to do because, well, the tension was quite high for the Americans. And when he left the building, the first thing he saw was that German standing behind that machine gun with his hands in the air. And that's when soldiers came walking in, and they had a completely different uniform. And the first civilian said, he spoke some English, he was the headmaster of the school. He said to the first American, welcome to the Netherlands. And this is the road they used to get into the Netherlands. So first steps into the Netherlands was right on this dirt road up here.
Let's just recap this as the host there. For those watching it, this is the location where the very first American troops stepped into the Netherlands. Is that what we're saying?
Exactly.
Now, this is really exciting stuff. I can only assume this is the very first time anybody's ever done a live stream of the exact route taken by the first American boots in the Netherlands. This is really exciting stuff.
It has been on television a couple of times, but never live. And last year, national television was filming in the wrong direction, of course. So they should have asked some questions. But Jürgen, you can see the blue sign. That says Meuse. That's where they enter the village. And to the left is the school. That's not the first liberated building in the Netherlands, as the Americans fought for 4 hours to get into Meuse. A few kilometers to the west of Meuse, that's where other Americans from the 113th Squadron, Red Horse, crossed the Dutch-Belgian border as well and liberated a farmhouse, which is called the Mughof. And that farmhouse is the first liberated building in the Netherlands.
Wow.
Well, this is the road into Meuse, and just a few yards further up on the left-hand side, there is a monument dedicated to the Americans, which entered the Netherlands for the very first time. And I think there is going to be a ceremony tomorrow, but here the white monument, it's very hard to read. Even if you're standing in front of it, it's unfortunately hard to read. But it says that this monument is erected to dedicate the men of the 30th Infantry Division who crossed the Dutch-Belgian border at 10 a.m. on September the 12th, 1944, thus becoming the first American troopers to enter the Netherlands. And then you can see the plaque
to Leonard
Hoffman. And Leonard Hoffman, who was killed in Belgium, but he was fighting to get into the Netherlands. So
it counts as being the Battle of the Netherlands, doesn't it? Yeah.
So that's why they put up these two plaques. But Jürgen, there's one more little plaque I want to show these guys. because first things first for the Americans, of course, Kevin. But
yes,
this is Leonard Hoffman. Jürgen, if you go to the next plaque to the building, please, because I don't want to spoil it. But Jürgen knows what I mean. It's just a small plaque, and we're going to do this just a few seconds. You have the view on that road again. They came down.
Yeah.
And yeah, obviously there should be one of the first buildings being liberated by the Netherlands is this one. And that's a little plaque, and I hope we can read it. But it's called Auberge het Koffer, and as you can see, the first liberated cafe in the Netherlands. So first things first for the Americans.
Well, the same as France, wasn't it? So we got the Gondre Cafe at Pegasus Bridge. What is it about us taking cafes first? Was it this need to have a cup of coffee when you've had a war? I think.
So, but this village was liberated between 2 and 2:30 p.m. So 4 hours after they crossed the border, but thus becoming the first liberated village of the Netherlands. And Jürgen can move on to his next spot, so we can see how my dad is doing.
Okay, I'll bring your dad in again.
And well, if you
Frank, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
When the Americans went into Sicily, the civilians were giving them oranges and watermelons. When they get into France, the French people are giving them wine. What did the Dutch people give to the American liberators? Was it the same as the French, or what did they do?
All sorts of things, because it's September, so they got a lot of apples. And you know the apple story, Americans even used it as a secret weapon. So they tried to make the Germans think that they were throwing hand grenades, but they were throwing apples sometimes, but also apple pie. So people baked because they could hear the war coming closer and closer. And they could hear that the Americans were coming, and there's one family who baked 12 apple pies on the morning of September the 12th, and when the Americans passed, they handed out those apple pies. And you see my dad, and so if he's holding his camera right up, no, to the left, okay, you can see those people walking down that road, and in the far distance there was a tractor driving. But first building on the right-hand side up there, that's where the people put out a box of apples, and it only took 10 minutes for the Americans to empty that box. And if you take the 119th map, Paul, and because this is the road, this is my hometown actually. So my dad is standing about 50 yards away from where I'm sitting, but you can see the blue lines, and the blue line on the right-hand side, that's 3rd Battalion, and attached to it is the green line. But they crossed the border around 5 p.m. So about 2.5 hours after, or 2.5, 3 hours after Meuse was liberated. I can see my hometown of Noorbeek. Yeah. And my dad is actually looking from inside the village towards the border.
So he's looking back. Okay.
He's looking a little bit to the southwest. So that's down that road. But I want to take the story of Kenneth Thayer. Kenneth Thayer was from K Company, 3rd Battalion, 119th Regiment. And Kenneth Thayer, I think his memory mixed up a little bit, but he actually remembered liberating Noorbeek as they entered the village. And you can see that building was quite new, and that's Kenneth Thayer. That's actually during the ceremony when he received the Distinguished Service Cross later on in the war. But if you go back to my dad's camera, yes, that building is new, but it has been built in the exact same shape as that building was, although that building was a farmhouse during World War II. And they had golden pheasants. The people who were living there had golden pheasants. And that was what Kenneth Thayer remembered. If my dad turns a little bit to the left, because this building has been rebuilt, obviously. And a little bit higher, please. Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. And I just sent you a picture before the show, Paul, because there was another thing that Kenneth Thayer could remember, and that was some sort of gate which was painted in quite a funny shape. Well, you can see it on the picture, and you can see the other buildings in that picture. My dad has all 3 of those buildings inside his camera point. So that's another now and then picture, because that was the former bakery in my hometown. But that was the gate that Kenneth Thayer could remember. And the most important thing, if my dad starts walking right now, perfect. That's Kenneth Thayer said it was about a 50 to 100 yards to get to a square and to the main square in that village. And he could remember that there was a shop and that had some Dutch words on top of it. And that's how he recognized that he was in, that he knew that he was in the Netherlands. They didn't even know that he had crossed the border already.
Right.
But the Belgian part up there, that's a French-speaking part, just for a small strip, but most likely he hadn't seen it. But they were used to the French language, and all of a sudden they saw something different. And that's when he said to the other guys, hey guys, we must be in Holland. And he always thought that they were the first Americans to cross the Dutch-Belgian border. Well, they were not. That was courtesy of the 117th Regiment. And my dad is almost there, and if my dad gets to the correct spot, he will show you that that former shop, but the Dutch words are still above the windows up there. And that's how we knew that, like, Kenneth Thayer, he is one of the liberators of our hometown, and we were glad that we got in touch with him, because that was in 2008 and he passed away in 2010. But we got his part of his story. And yeah, that's unfortunately a really blurry picture, but those are the only two pictures we have of Kenneth C. Thayer. And actually, oh, that's perfect what my dad has right now, because you can see the church, but to the right of the church, you can see the former shop with the Dutch words. And this is also a fantastic then and now picture, Paul. I don't know if you can find that picture from my hometown, but there is a picture. I posted it a couple of times, and you can see the church. You can see the street where that car was driving down. That's the street that the Americans came up. So there it is. Just a few trees have disappeared, but that's about it. Those are the Americans. The Dutch, we see 60, if I call it WCO weapons carrier 63, towing a 57mm gun. This is not September 12. This is most likely September 13 or maybe September 14, as we were liberated at 5:30 p.m.
Is
and
that damage to the church tower there? Is that damage there?
No, there's no damage.
That's just a blur on the photo.
That's a flag. That's a flag hanging out.
Oh, that's a flag. Okay, yeah, I can see that.
And you can see the clock. Well, it says 10:15 at that time. Well, this is the then and now picture people want to take if they get to my hometown. So that's an awesome picture. My dad is going to walk up a little bit further. So he's going to walk the exact same road that the Man of K Company under the 19th took. And not too much has happened in my hometown. Well, one firefight occurred. And actually, you can see the Liberation Monument up here. So 3 birds inaugurated by the Queen of the Netherlands, Juliana, at that time, at the 25th anniversary of the liberation of our hometown. So my dad is going to walk further. And that was in 1969. But when the Americans moved up further up in the village, all of a sudden a German truck came from a side road. And the Americans opened fire. They killed the driver. And the other Germans flee into the orchards and the fields. And when the Germans opened that truck, they found a lot of hams and other stuff, more food. So the Germans were stealing a lot at that time to bring it back to their own country for their own use. And when the Americans opened the truck, they found it. And maybe it's because of that box with apples. I don't know, Kevin. But the Americans handed it out to the civilians in my hometown. So they didn't keep it for themselves. Or maybe most of it they handed out to the civilians. What I want to do with
that's a big difference. That's a big difference between the Americans and the Germans, and I've read about it, is that the Germans took, I think, like 80% of the food from the occupied countries of Europe, whereas the Americans were well supplied with food and were giving food to the civilians that they came across. So it just polar opposites. The Germans kind of robbing, stealing everything they can get their hands on, and the Americans and the Allies very much the opposite of handing out chocolate and C rations, K rations, anything they had, they were always happy to share with the civilians, and it just was such worked great dividends.
Albeit your crappy American chocolate, I don't know, and that's why you give it away, because none of you want to eat it yourself. I love lots of things that are American, but your chocolate.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt, Paul. I'm going to interrupt because time-wise, I just want to show a couple of then and now pictures right here, because you can see the former monastery on the right-hand side, the large building behind the tree. Well, I sent you a couple of pictures, and you can see the church tower. You can see the monastery as well in those pictures, and well, not too much again has changed, but you can see some civilians on the left-hand side of the picture. And actually, one of them is still alive, but he's not living in my hometown anymore. But the monastery is just on the right-hand side of the screen. And there's another picture. Yeah. Okay, yeah, no problem. But this is the road K Company used to get to their daily objective up there. And that's even better. The only thing which has changed is the hedgerow and the two posts on the right-hand side, because that was the entrance to the monastery. But you can see the church in the background up there, and a police motor on the left-hand side of the road. But that's a Dutch police car. But I just wanted to show you these pictures. So my dad is going back into the car, and while he is driving, I will already start talking, because time-wise, otherwise we're not going to make it. But he only has to drive for about 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah, that's the one with the monastery. Yeah. So you can see the M10 driving through the streets. And most of those pictures were taken on September the 13th. Because on September the 12th, is most of the Americans, they saw those were infantrymen walking through the streets with just a couple of tanks coming through. And I want to talk now about Staff Sergeant Roy Boer, because Roy Boer, he was with K Company 119th Regiment, and actually he had a twin brother who was serving in 1st Battalion 120th. His twin brother, his name was Ray Boer, and that's a picture of Roy Boer. Well, Staff Sergeant Roy Boer was born in Kentucky, and they were raised in Kentucky until the Great Depression, and that's when they moved to California. And that's where Roy and Ray joined the army. The only thing the family doesn't know anymore, if it was Ray or Roy who was drafted into the army. You can see Roy on the left-hand side and Ray on the right-hand side of that picture, with cousin Eddie in between them. But one of them was drafted into the army, and the other said, well, if he has to go, I will go as well. And he volunteered to get into the army. And I don't know why they got into the same division, but Roy serving in the 119th, Ray serving in the 120th, and they were already fighting with the 30th Division in Normandy. And it was at some point, and it must have been after the battle for Mortain, Paul, that one of the two twin brothers, most likely Roy, was standing on top of a balcony, and he saw his twin brother walking underneath that balcony. And he shouted at him, and they had a conversation for about 15 minutes. But that would be the last time they would ever see each other. Wow. And that was a few weeks before Roy entered the Netherlands. And you can see a picture of Roy, well, picture taken before he went overseas, picture taken in California. And when Roy served with 119th, well, he became a staff sergeant in Company K. And when Roy, well, most of the men, Kenneth Thayer didn't know Roy personally, but everybody always says they must have been very great guys, because you don't become a staff sergeant by doing nothing. If you can put my dad back on, because my dad will be at the spot right now. I think he's in the waiting room or so.
Yeah, I'm just getting that. Yeah.
Come on, Paul.
Yeah. I'm so excited. I'm enjoying the show myself. Hang on.
He's drinking a pint.
Well, we have one more spot after this, and then we'll finish for today.
Just waiting for George's video.
I think it will come in quickly.
Real quick, Frank, that first photograph of that one of that first area liberated, where you saw the barn doors that were like black and white stripes,
yes.
Was that because of blackout rules, or was that normal?
Actually, no idea.
Okay, because a lot of things you couldn't have lights on in Europe at night, so they tended to paint white stripes on things so you could see it a little bit better at night since you couldn't use lights.
I think it's just design, Kevin. I think that's it.
I think too much sometimes.
Well, no problem. Ask your questions. That's what we're here for. Well, I'm going to continue with Roy's story because just outside our village, there was a main road going. It's still there, of course. And that was the objective for 3rd Battalion, 119th for that day. They had to capture part of that road, so they had to block the German retreat. And K Company had to block that road. Well, about 1 kilometer outside our village, that's when they got to a farmhouse. And the people who are living in that farmhouse, the guy went up to the Americans, but he didn't speak any English. But luckily, he spoke French. And there was one guy with K Company who was able to understand French. And that the inhabitant of that farmhouse, he said, well, there are Germans in the woods right across the road. It's just 200 yards away from you. So that's when 2 guys from K Company went out for a patrol to do some reconnaissance. And one of the guys jumped over a hedgerow. And while jumping over that hedgerow, he was shot in the right-hand side of his chest. The other guy tried to get to him, but he couldn't get to him. There was a medic trying to go around the farmhouse to get to the wounded guy, but he never got to him because of the German fire coming from the top of the hill inside the woods. And that's when the Americans called in for air support. And 3 fighter planes, might have been P-51 Mustangs, we don't know. They came in from 3 different sides and they strafed those woods on top of that hill. And K Company was leading the attack. Well, they were held up for an hour and a half at least. So L Company, which were following K Company, they made a movement around the village and they took that main road that day. So they took the objective and then didn't get in time to that wounded man. And that wounded man, that was Staff Sergeant Roy Boer. And we started doing research on him in 2007, as we had heard that an American trooper had been killed just outside our village. And well, nobody knew who it was, and it took us 1 year to identify him. And that's also when we learned that during the actual liberation of the Netherlands, Staff Sergeant Boer was the first American soldier to be killed in the Netherlands on Dutch soil. Wow. And that's why we erected a monument for him. It looks a little bit like a milestone because we saw it as a milestone, well, in the history of the Netherlands, but also in the history of the 30th Infantry Division. And of course, in the history of our village. We're quite chauvinistic, I have to say. But that was that was Staff Sergeant Boer. But we're going to try to see if we can get back to my dad a little later on, as Jürgen is driving to his next destination, and he will be there in a few minutes. What I can see right now. Sure.
Another quick question. I interviewed a soldier from the 104th Division. They come in much later into Holland. And I was asking him kind of what he remembered in his experiences. And he talked about Dutch tulips. And I'm wondering, were the tulips in bloom when the 30th Division came through? Did any of the veterans talk about that to you? Because that, to me, is something very Dutch when you talk about tulips.
I know it's really Dutch, Kevin, but I don't think they were looking for it, as they were really up front. So the Germans are just 100 yards away sometimes. You're not going to take a look at the flowers. You're going to try to find Germans. Otherwise, they will kill you. And actually, we've got the viewpoint my dad has. He's going to film alongside the farmhouse. And you can see that's where that family was living. And you can see a little bit of the garden. Later that afternoon, after L Company had taken the objective, an American Sherman tank was parked right here at that spot where my dad is facing towards that hedgerow. And that's when the farmer's son, who was still alive, he told us, well, we were surprised because we were living in a blackout. And first things the Americans did was taking all the curtains off. They went into the farmhouse, took all the curtains off, and it was full bright light all night long. We were living in the basement. We were scared to death. But it seemed like the Americans were having a party. And what the Americans didn't know was that only 350 yards away or so, there were still 150 Germans. But most likely the Germans didn't know about the Americans being there. And the Germans left a little later during the night. But that really scared the people. And my dad is walking towards the monument right now. So the road was a little bit different. If my dad can face a little bit to the left, because you can see the woods on top of the hill. It's just a small hill on the right-hand side. But if my dad keeps on walking, on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a green fence right now.
Yeah.
It's quite a large fence. And the road, you can see the grass. That's where the road was, where the grass is. And where the green fence is, that's the exact spot where Staff Sergeant Boer jumped over the hedgerow, and that's where he was killed in action. And in the 1990s, before we knew about it, they built a pump station right at that spot. So, Dad, stop, please. If you face towards the green fence, that's the exact same spot where Staff Sergeant Boer was killed in action. And the monument is just a little bit further. So my dad keeps on walking. It's just a few yards further up because we couldn't put up a monument inside a locked up area. And in 2009, we were able to erect a monument. 2014, we put up an information sign. So my dad is going to show you the information sign first. So it's to his left. And we've got some tags in Dutch and English, the patch of the 30s, pictures of the village, and of course, a picture of Staff Sergeant Boer. And if you can show the monument right now, Dad, so people can see, it looks like a milestone. And well, we have had family members coming back. There should be family members coming back this September, but because of all the COVID going on, unfortunately, they're not able to come. But this monument here is for the first soldier who was killed during the actual liberation of the Netherlands at Dutch soil. So
I just want to jump in here, Frank, and just congratulate you on what you do to honor these people and get involved in these monuments, because historians come in all shapes and sizes. There are people with degrees in history, there are tour guides, there are ex-military, there are amateurs that do this work, and someone like yourself is absolutely one of the top historians in the Netherlands, because you are involved in memorializing and remembering these little stories that are little in the grand scheme of things. One American soldier dying here is a tiny part of World War II, but for your village, for you, and for Boer's family, of course, it's an incredible story. And I can only, on behalf of the World War II TV viewers, thank you for what you've been doing, and your friend, your dad, for doing incredible camera work, and Jürgen. And I'm sure Kevin is with me on saying this is amazing stuff we're doing, and the dedication you're showing to just memorializing one single American is something to respect. So thank you very much on behalf of the viewers, Frank.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to say one thing I disagree on, because no, not a top historian. No, it's not. It's a passion we share. And why do we do this? We do this to honor these men, because they were fighting for our freedom. And that's what we have to keep in mind. That's what we have to remember. So although there is a COVID-19 going on right now, we will have ceremonies in this area tomorrow. We will have a small ceremony also at this monument here to dedicate the sacrifice of Roy Boer, because we don't see it as people who gave their lives for our freedom anymore, but we see it as people whose lives were taken away.
Yeah,
that's completely different.
Yeah,
and that's what some people maybe have to think about, because it's a life being cut short. That's how
that's a Don Baguette quote. Did you get that from Don? Because that's one of the things Don Baguette, for those watching, Don
I think
Baguette,
I heard it more often, but
when Don wrote Curry here, Screaming Eagle and Norman, he always said that about the cemeteries. He said, I don't like hearing people say that these men or women gave their lives. He said, they gave their service and their lives were violently taken away. And I think that's a very important distinction. I try and not say when I go into a cemetery that anyone gave their life. They gave their service, they gave their dedication, but their lives were always taken away violently and suddenly. So, but anyway, it's my show. You are a top historian, so just shut up.
Well, it might have come from Don, as I was good friends with Don as well, just like you. And well, I heard more people saying it. Jürgen says it. My dad says it as well. So that's what we have to think about. It's not like the romance of war. That's not the case. And actually, yes, last year we had 4 veterans back here in the Netherlands, and they also visited our monument. I have to say, I was really proud that they visited the monument, as I know how much work it takes to do the research and to get a monument erected and everything. But why does it make you proud? Because of all that work, and you're doing it for those people to show them that they didn't fight for nothing.
Absolutely.
And John O'Hare, I'm going to talk about John shortly in a few minutes, as I see that Jürgen is almost at the spot.
He's moving fast, Jürgen. He's always running, I think.
Yeah, Jürgen can take it easy. But John O'Hare, he said, well, I just come back to see how the people are doing. And I really appreciate what I see 75 years later. The people have been building up a normal life, and they were able to restore their freedom. And that's John at the end of the war. And we used that picture, if I'm not mistaken, in the Montaigne episodes as well.
Yeah.
And well, that's John again. I'm coming back to John in a few moments, but that is done with filming right now. So Dad, thank you very much. You did an awesome job. And you can have a drink or so.
Is that finished now, is it then?
So that is right filming at the monument right now. So that's the last view we're going to have.
That's his hat there. Well done. Well done, George. Well done, Frank's dad. Thank you very much for being part of this. And we very much appreciate your incredible camera work today. So thank you very much, George. And yeah, you can have a beer later.
That will be on me. We're going to switch towards Jürgen right now, because Jürgen is right now in the city of Maastricht. And if you have the 117th map, Paul, then I can show you how they moved up, because you know they crossed the Meuse River at the Argento, and we're actually going to follow the purple line. The purple line is 2nd Battalion, 117th, the same guys at Le Neufbourg near Mortain. They crossed the Dutch-Belgian border also on September the 12th, 1944, around 4 p.m. They moved further north, and then they made a right turn, and then they finally went into the city of Maastricht, which is on the top left. And if you remember that first map we had, the big red dot, that's the city of Maastricht. And mainly, oh, sorry, the second map.
Sorry.
Was this? No, I messed up. You know what I told you? If it sucks, you can blame me, and if it rocks,
There we are. That's the one you want.
Because of all of us.
There we are.
And yeah, that's the one.
Just
and
don't blame me.
You can see the big red dot on the left. On the right-hand side of the dot, it says Wijk.
Yeah.
Wijk, as you would call it. That's the eastern side of the Meuse River. So that's what was liberated by 2nd Battalion, 117th. And Jürgen, there's something in front of your camera, so we don't have the entire image right now. But Jürgen is on the right-hand side, on the eastern side of the Meuse River. So this is where 2nd Battalion, 117th Regiment was. And they had to cross, they liberated this area September 13th, 1944, but they had to liberate the entire city, which is right behind the trees on the opposite side of the embankment, on the opposite side of the river. And, well, when September the 14th came up in the early morning, that's when 2nd Battalion, 117th, including John O'Hare, had to cross the Meuse River. And that's a picture which is right behind you, Paul. That's 2nd Battalion, 117th, crossing the river. And Jürgen is almost at the spot where that crossing happened. The buildings have disappeared, so we don't have a complete vantage point for then and now, but you can see the river is not that wide at that spot. Because where they first crossed in Belgium on September 11, that's where the river was much wider. But right here, it's not that wide. And You used that picture of that damaged bridge when you were letting the people know about this show coming up.
Yeah.
So the bridge with the arches, that's way in the distance, but I couldn't do that time-wise. So maybe Jürgen, that one. And if Jürgen zooms in, you can see that bridge in the distance. But in late August 1945, that's when. So Jürgen, if you can zoom in on the old bridge, please. Let's see how far we can get. But in late August, late August, the Americans tried to bomb a railroad bridge in Maastricht, and well, that didn't go very well. So quite some civilians were killed in action by that bombing. But later on, when the Americans arrived, well, yes, they were treated like real heroes and liberators. But this is at the spot where the Americans crossed the river, 2nd Battalion, 117th, crossing the Meuse River right here. And you can see it's not that wide up here. If Jürgen starts walking towards the big Old Hickory monument, you can see at that spot that the river is much wider. So that's what it must have been in this area right here. And if you can go back to John O'Hare's story, we can get back to it. John O'Hare, well, I told his story at Le Noorbeek, part 1 of the Mortain episodes. And John, he did one amazing thing. Somewhere in France, most likely northern France, he jumped off a wall. And John went up to a medic and he said to the medic, well, I think I just broke both my feet. And the medic said to him, you are just a private. What the hell do you know? Get your ass back to the front line. So John went back to the front line and marched his way up into Belgium, through Belgium, into the Netherlands, was one of the liberators of Maastricht. And shortly after the liberation of Maastricht, a few days later, John went up to a different medic and he said, listen, so my feet are really hurting, or my feet hurt. And well, I never took my boots off. Can you take a look at them? And that's when the medic took his boots off. He looked at John's feet and he said, well, you've got 2 broken feet. So John walked all the way from northern France through Belgium into the Netherlands on 2 broken feet. And
wow.
That took about 2 weeks or so. But John knew if I take my boots off, I will never get my boots back on. And the fact is, if you take your boots off, of course, at that moment, the Germans would make a surprise attack or so, and you will lose your boots. So he never took his boots off until that medic took his boots off and realized that John had 2 broken feet. And that's when John was evacuated even back towards England. And they had to break his feet again. And that's how he missed the Battle of the Bulge. And he didn't have any problems with missing the Bulge.
Wow. I mean, it's a cliche. When we talk about that generation being tough sons of bitches, that is a story that absolutely symbolizes that.
You can show his wartime picture again.
For 2 hours if I step on a Lego brick, you know, I mean, so these guys are great. So yeah, fantastic stuff.
Jürgen is just going underneath the bridge, and then within 2 minutes he will be at the monument, which is only a short stop, and that will be the end of this show. But maybe you can show John's wartime picture once more, because that was the guy that was taken even after his feet were broken. So he rejoined Easy Company 117, 2nd Battalion 117, and he made it all the way up to Magdeburg, Germany. And that picture was taken in Magdeburg, Germany, with the 2 guys, 2 German boys acting as translators.
In fact, we had the question earlier on YouTube, is when did the 30th Division leave the Netherlands?
When did they leave? Well, actually, they stopped at the Dutch-German border, Paul, because that's where the Siegfried Line was.
Yeah.
Plus, the supply lines were stretched way too long. So that's just a few days after this, because Maastricht was liberated September 14, 1944. If you take the map with the red dots again, maybe it's a little bit easier to show you, because Maastricht is on the western side of this. And on the top right, if you don't zoom in, but if you zoom out, And yeah, there it is. You can see the city of Heerlen, a little bit to the left, Paul, with your arrow.
Yeah,
there it is. That's also, and to the right of it, you can see Kerkrade. To the right of it, that's already Germany. You can see a small village called Horbach. You can see the dot of the German city of Aachen, and the further south, the bottom right.
Aachen, spelled the German
way.
So
you can see where the border is going. But that Dutch city of Kerkrade, that was only liberated in October 1944. So we were really lucky. Why was this area liberated by the Americans? Well, this is the panhandle of the Netherlands. And this was not an objective for the Americans. The objective was the German city of Aachen. They wanted to take that city and then move up further north toward the industrial area, which is the Ruhr area. That was their objective, not this part of the Netherlands. And if you go back to Jürgen right now, because he's getting to the Old Hickory Crossing Monument, and Jürgen you can keep moving. There's a small plaque, horizontal plaque, to the right of the monument. Jürgen will give you that shot. And of course, you don't cross a river in a span of about 50 yards or so. It's almost always a little bit wider. So you can see the plaque right here. You can see the opposite side of the river as well. And yeah, this is also a spot where they were crossing, but it's already a little bit wider up here. So Jürgen, if you can show us the monument from the other side, because I've done now a picture from 1994. And that's a picture with Frank Towers on it. But that was the inauguration of the monument. That was exactly 50 years after. Okay, that's okay, Jürgen, you can turn around. And that is exactly 50 years later. I don't know if you can find that picture, Paul.
I don't think it's not in my folder, no.
Oh, okay. Well, no problem. Well, you can see the entire monument again. And so this is the area where the Americans crossed the Meuse River, 2nd Battalion, 117th Regiment. And there's one more thing I want to do, Paul, and then we're finished with this. Well, let me say one more thing. 117th, 2nd Battalion, crossed the Meuse River, went into the city center, but from the opposite side, from the western side, that's 2nd Battalion, 120th, coming into the city as well. So they pinched the Germans. Not much of a fighting was going on, as most of the Germans didn't want to fight anymore. They just wanted to survive World War II. And most of the men were elderly, if I may call it like that.
You mean like me and Kevin? Yeah.
Okay, you say it. Yes, well, let me agree, please. But but Jürgen is going to do one thing. Jürgen is going to walk through the monument. And while Jürgen is walking through the monument, well, we have been talking about an area, not the entire area you could see on the maps, but there were some Americans who were killed in action in that area. And I just want to call their names so we won't forget. And from September 11 until September 14, those men were Private Wayman Lawhorn, Private First Class Adam Farias, Private First Class Leonard Hoffman, Private First Class Wallace Horton, Staff Sergeant Roy Boer, Private Daniel Pearson, Staff Sergeant Louis DeFady, T. Sergeant Walter Krasinski, Private Albert Strale, Sergeant Raymond Garginis, Private Arthur Andrew, Sergeant Robert Baker, and Staff Sergeant Robert Horse. And I think with this view of those two patches of the 30th Infantry Division and carved into this monument, I think that's a good way to end it. So we will make sure that these men will never be forgotten. And I don't know if there are any questions left, because I see we did a little bit longer than I promised.
I'm enjoying it. It's great. It's been great stuff. And we'll bring Kevin into some things up as well about what happened next for the American Army in this part of the Netherlands. But Frank, you've done an amazing job. I knew it would be good, this show, but honestly, the information you have, the personal stories, the then and now stuff, this is a small engagement in the grand scheme of things, but that doesn't make it any less significant or any less important. And the work you've done here to bring this stuff to us is just incredible. So thank you so much, Frank, on behalf of everybody. And Kevin, what's your feeling about this campaign? It's not really known. Not much is known about it, is it? It just sort of falls between the cracks a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, Yes, because you've got Market Garden that's gonna come right up behind it, and then really Battle of the Bulge kind of sucks all the attention historically away from these great advances and these accomplishments that they kind of dwindle in the historic sense by the great kind of climactic battle of the Bulge. But like you were saying, it's no less insignificant. People are liberated, lives are saved, by these advances. If they had stayed static, back in the Normandy beachhead, the Dutch people wouldn't know this liberation, and so many lives would not have made it. The people would not have survived living under that sort of German oppression of Nazi Germany. And I have to say, Frank, as an American watching what you were doing with the monuments and walking us through is very, very humbling, because Americans like to think we know history, but it's people like you in those towns that are part of that legacy that understand it on such a much more thorough level. And it's something that I greatly appreciate. I'm sure anybody watching this appreciates, and it makes me want to get there and see those monuments and kind of give our own kind of salute. But Americans, just don't know World War II in that depth the way you guys do it. And I just really appreciate what you do, bud.
Well, that's the less we can do, as you know, and it's an honor for us to do it. And I can tell you from the list, from all the names I just read out loud, there are 3 who don't have a monument yet, but people are working on it. So they're coming up as well. And I just want to take time to thank Jürgen for filming today, for taking his time, for helping us out. You did an excellent job, Jürgen. Thank you very much. I was
coming to that in a second, Frank. I was going to thank Jürgen. But yeah, no, absolutely fantastic job. I mean, they've covered some ground today. Yeah,
thank you, Jürgen.
Very much, Jürgen. I think your dad's back in here. Otherwise, he can say hello again. I don't know. But and don't forget as well, I want to point out, I always like in Normally talk about the civilians. I mean, this area may have been liberated to some extent, but there's lots of hardship coming for the Dutch later on, isn't there? Because of food shortages and hunger. The war is far from over yet. Simply the need to eat becomes a big deal, doesn't it, during the winter of 44, 45. So I urge people to look into the Dutch civilian experience as well, and maybe we can have Frank come back on and do something about the Dutch from that civilian point of view, because I think that'd be very interesting as well. So I think we've done an amazing job today. I'm really pleased with what you guys have done. So it's been amazing. So I think we're going to bring it to an end. And Frank, you've been superb. Kevin, your introduction to bookend and the conclusion there was great to bookend it. And I just enjoy having you on to talk about things. And in terms of those watching, they're coming thick and fast, the streams now. Tomorrow we're on Omaha Beach in the afternoon with Linda earlier talking about Waverly Woodson, the Black Medic with a 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, and the campaign to have him awarded the Medal of Honor. Then we on the very early of the Sunday morning, we're on Omaha Beach again for the anniversary of Operation Aquatint. And then there's lots of shows coming up. Keep an eye on Twitter, keep an eye on YouTube. We've got lots of things coming up. Jürgen, fantastic there. Everyone's done a fantastic job today. It ran a bit 15 minutes longer than I thought it was going to, but hey.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So, and your dad, I think your dad is in the waiting room. I don't know, his camera's out of battery. I'll try and bring him back in again. But
or just logged out, perhaps. That's also possible.
Okay, no problem. But anyway, so thank you, Frank. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Jürgen. Thank you, George. So this is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV. Again, please consider having a look at our Patreon page to try and help us with a bit more funding to make more of these things. I would very much like this to become my main occupation, if you like, next year. I think there's so many stories to do. We've got amazing shows coming up. At the moment, I'm being contacted by 1 or 2 or 3 historians pretty much daily offering ideas for shows. Just today, I was talking about an amazing story down in Brittany about an escape line that got Allied pilots back out of France into Britain, that we're working on that one of whom this pilot who was brought back from Brittany was Jane Birkin, the actress's father. We're working on that one. May even try and get Jane Birkin involved. So there's loads more stuff I want to do. We've just got to get this. Dr. Philip Blood is watching. I want to bring him in on an Aachen show, bring you in, Frank, on an Aachen show. Aachen's coming up. That's We mentioned it in this. That's going to be coming up in a future show. So that's it. I'm rambling now. Thank you for watching, everybody. It's been a great educational journey we've been on this afternoon, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So this is Paul saying thank you very much, everybody. Join us again very shortly on World War II TV.
Old Hickory.
Old Hickory.
Old Hickory. Have a great day, guys.
Right.
You too.